Welcome to the Roberts Law Office Injury Podcast. Kentucky attorney Jeff Roberts has over 25 years of experience. He'll provide answers to your questions related to personal injury and automobile accidents, workers' compensation claims, and Social Security disability benefits. Let's join Jeff for this episode. Well, friends, welcome back in the studio. Today we have Jeff Roberts, personal injury attorney down in Callaway County, Murray, Kentucky. Also has a satellite office over in Hopkinsville, over in Christian County. Today we're going to talk about school bus collisions that result in injuries to the kiddos. So, Jeff, welcome back to the studio.
Good seeing you again, Jim.
Always. Hey, so realistically, I mean, these are horrible cases because, I mean, seatbelts are not available in most school buses. So sometimes, depending on the type of collision they're in, these kiddos can get banged up pretty badly. This ultimately is a personal injury case, though, right?
Correct. It is, to some extent, very similar to a automobile collision. There's obviously different components to that. You got multiple injured parties a lot of times in these types of collisions. Commercial vehicle with a school bus from that standpoint. So you have some different elements, but then a lot of it is similar to a normal motor vehicle collision.
I mean, it's unfortunate when these things happen. And, interestingly enough, you said just recently there were a couple of them down in Murray, really on the same day, I think you said, right?
Yes, there were two, one Murray School, one Callaway County School, from what I understand. That I saw news things about those. One, as far as I know, did not result in any injuries. The other one, I think there were some injuries, but I'm not really sure about that. I didn't hear a whole lot about what the injuries were in those wrecks.
Well, as we were saying, again, it's handled somewhat like a normal motor vehicle accident, like a normal car wreck. So I think it's important, if you're the parent and you're looking at your kiddo, go get them checked out. Go get them checked out because the kids are going to feel things a little bit differently, and I think the kiddos would probably have a harder time explaining what they're feeling or sensing.
I think that is correct. If they're involved in a collision like this, it obviously depends on the age of the children to some extent, but the younger children may not, they can tell you they hurt in places, but they're not going to be as detailed a lot of times from that standpoint. And going to the doctor and getting them checked out is a good idea if they're ever involved in these type of collisions. Hopefully they will not be from that standpoint. And with these type of collisions as well, what you see, or at least what I've seen in the past, is children can and sometimes will develop PTSD, post-traumatic stress, from the collision. They may not want to get on the school bus, may not want to get in a vehicle again, or if it was a truck that ran into the school bus, they may be fearful any time they see a truck on the roadway. And so kids can be very resilient, but they can also be very susceptible to certain types of injuries as well. So,
well, normally we think of medical bills, but also working with a therapist, a licensed therapist, a psychologist, or some other kind of therapist, which would be healthy for the kiddo in that situation, can be covered in these typical claims, right?
Yes, that would be a medical bill that would be covered the same as an emergency room visit or going to the pediatrician or for a checkup, or if depending on what the child's injuries are. Potentially going to a chiropractor, going to a counselor if it's a mental health aspect to it from post-traumatic stress. All of those should be covered under the medical coverage available to the children.
Well, let's talk about some of the more common injuries. I mean, again, there's not really seatbelts, and I still don't understand that, but there's not really seatbelts on most of the school buses these days. So I would think whiplash is going to be an issue where if they get hit from the back, the bus gets hit from the back. I mean, there are going to be some moving front and back, and it's going to really kind of strain some of those muscles and ligaments. So that's typically what you might call a soft tissue injury. Is that right?
Whiplash is frequently referred to as soft tissue because you don't have any broken bones. It's tearing of the muscles and tendons and things of that nature. So a lot of people call it a soft tissue injury. from that standpoint. That it can still be a very, very painful injury and a long-lasting injury, but it's not a broken bone, so it doesn't show up on an X-ray.
Interesting. And then, obviously you just said it, the broken bones are going to be an issue here. I mean,
Correct.
there's wrists and all arms and knees and legs and all these things. Yeah, it's a school bus, but some of these impacts are still just as dangerous, especially to a kiddo without a seatbelt. At least in a sedan, I've got my seatbelt on, right?
Yes, and you can see broken bones from kids fall into the either hit the seat in front of them, fall out into the floor, and hit their arm or something of that nature. So you do see broken bones in these type of collisions at times, and frankly, you can very easily with some of these in the more severe collisions see traumatic brain injuries and things of that nature. So it can be very, very serious injuries.
And let's talk about the traumatic brain injury. I've done a little bit of research in that for different topics, and what I was made aware of is that basically as slow as 17 miles an hour, you can actually sustain a traumatic brain injury because that brain is kind of floating free inside the skull. So if there's a sudden impact or moving forward and stopping, that your brain is basically going to bounce off the inside of your head. I mean, and that could be a very significant injury, even though it looks like they're doing just fine.
Correct. A lot of people think of traumatic brain injury, and they're thinking of, okay, the skull's cracked open and things of that nature. But a lot of traumatic brain injuries are what is sometimes referred to as a closed head injury, which means there is no broken bones or anything of that nature. You see that a lot of the football players who have concussions and things of that nature. So you have traumatic brain injuries without in situations where sometimes you may not realize there's been a blow to the brain, for instance. Well, as far as the speed, if you've researched that, I don't dispute you whatsoever.
Yeah, slow as 17 miles an hour. Yeah. And it's amazing because you think, when I was a kid riding the school bus, I mean, the seat back in front of me was pretty high. So it's very conceivable that I may lurch forward and hit my forehead, on the back of that seat, or if I'm going the other way. Again, it doesn't take much. And so let's talk a little bit about TBI in terms of symptoms. So if we're talking to the parents here, obviously the child experiencing mood changes, I mean, that obviously is could be TBI related, but it's also memory issues, right?
Right. They can have memory issues, difficulty focusing, and it kind of depends to some extent on what part of the brain is injured there. So I'm not giving an exhaustive list whatsoever from this standpoint, but difficulty focusing, concentrating, memory problems can be part of that. You can see a kind of a change in the attitude. Some brain injuries can cause a person to be much more angry and say things they would not normally have said beforehand, so to speak. Some, at least there's some injuries that can result in affecting the person's sense of smell. And so there's different types of brain injuries and traumatic brain injuries and a wide variety of symptoms that can be associated with those.
Yeah, and if you hear the word concussion, that by definition is a brain injury.
Correct.
So you've got all that.
That's my understanding.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that can have some very long-term effects, and there's plenty of research out there about the potential early onset for dementia and Parkinson's and some other issues related to a brain trauma.
Correct.
And these little kiddos. I mean, as a parent, I mean, I know how protective I am. My kids are a lot older now, but it's a scary thing. It really is a scary possibility, and you can't really go to the hospital and say, "Hey, do an X-ray or an MRI." Brain trauma doesn't show up that way.
A lot of times you are absolutely correct. There are some tests that they can do and say, okay, yes, we look at this MRI and say, yeah, we can tell that there was trauma, there was a bleed here, and we can see that. So it can, some tests will show it, but the fact that it doesn't show something does not necessarily mean there wasn't trauma there. And so a lot of times you'll see initially after a bad motor vehicle collision, especially if someone is complaining of a headache or something of that nature. They will do a scan, and they're primarily looking at least from my understanding from talking to doctors, looking for a bleed or something of that nature. That's an emergent issue that's got to be addressed, or it could be fatal.
Right.
From that standpoint, but you don't really see the trauma to the brain as much in those. Now, there's some more sophisticated tests that are coming out that I think are being that are showing this much better than what they did in the past.
Interesting. Well, and you just mentioned that obviously they're looking for a bleed because it could lead to a fatality. That's another type of potential injury that could happen. Unfortunately, in a school bus crash, is where one of the students is killed. You now have a fatality, which is going to be pursued as a wrongful death claim.
Correct. Yes, and hopefully we all hope that never occurs.
Exactly.
Obviously, but unfortunately, those things do occur at times. And if that's the case, then the family does have a wrongful death claim in that setting, and are entitled to recover the damages from that. As from that standpoint, and then also the parents would have a claim for the child's loss as well, the loss of consortium or the grieving in the loss of a child. And of course, as a parent myself, I can't imagine anything more painful than that, to be honest. So,
well, as we look at these, obviously you've got a lot of experience handling car accidents, motorcycle accidents, tractor trailer collisions, things like that. So a bus accident with severe injuries, and even things that don't look as severe but could be, you can bring that wealth of experience, to that case, to that client.
Yeah, I've been doing motor vehicle collisions cases since 1992. So I'm basically 30 years of doing this type of work, and in my private practice, that's personal injury cases is all I do in my private practice. So, I've got 30 years of experience handling these cases, workers' comp, Social Security cases. But the injuries, you can see those type of injuries in workers' compensation claims, brain injuries, and broken bones, etc. So learning that medical side of it, and learning how to present the damages and to explain the injuries is part of what I've done over the past 30 years. So.
Wow. Well, let's talk about, normally if I'm just in an fender bender down at the local intersection, it's fairly cut and dry. Sometimes we're going to file a claim against the other driver's insurance. But when a school bus is involved, it's a little bit more complicated. There could be more parties involved here. Let's talk about something that comes up from time to time: sovereign immunity. What is that, and how does that apply in this situation?
Well, where it can come in, where you see that, and what sovereign immunity basically is, the government is immune from being sued unless they have waived that immunity in some form or fashion. If it comes into play in a school bus crash, if the bus driver was at fault in causing the crash, if the bus driver ran a stop sign, for instance, and that's what caused the crash, versus someone else running a stop sign and hitting the bus, then you can pursue a claim against the driver. Also, the school board would be liable for their employees' negligence from that standpoint. If it's a city school district, as a general rule, they're not going to be entitled to sovereign immunity in Kentucky. Counties, the state and county governments are entitled to sovereign immunity, so you may not be able to pursue the claim against the county, or you may have to. You could pursue the claim, but it would have to be pursued in the Board of Claims or Claims Commission, which is a different type of claim than similar but different court system with different requirements than a normal car wreck case would have.
Well, that assumes somebody else collides with the vehicle. Let me ask you this: what if we're dealing with something called mechanical failure? So, school bus is going down the road, curvy road, blows a tire because the tire hadn't been maintained, goes off the road, and crashes. I mean, what happens at that point when there's a mechanical failure of some sort?
Well, obviously, that's not the driver's fault. Well, I mean, drivers should be looking at their school bus, so you could have some driver negligence there as well. But if most, at least where I live at, most of these schools have their own shop that does the maintenance on their school buses. And so again, it's kind of the same situation with if the driver of the bus is negligent. If it's a school employee mechanic that is the one who is negligent, or the supervisor who's supposed to be checking over these vehicles as well is the one who is negligent in that regard in properly maintaining the vehicle, servicing brakes, etc., then the claims against that individual and also, again, against their employer, which would be the school system.
All right, and that doesn't have to be tires. It could be brake lights that aren't working, causes somebody to rear end them by accident. There could be, a lot of different things that fall under mechanical failures.
Correct.
But again, with devastating consequences to the kiddos riding to and from there.
Right.
Let's circle back around then to the third party negligence. And third party was just somebody else collides with the bus. It could be a tractor trailer. It could be just mom on the way to Kroger and suddenly in paying attention and sideswipes the bus. How do you pursue that now? Because you've got a few more people on a bus than you would in a car or a station wagon.
Yes, you've got a lot more people, and what can come into play there. We've talked before about limits of liability limits or bodily injury limits in a insurance in a car wreck case, and a lot of policies. If you look at it, if you look at your own policy, and you may see the coverage is it'll have 50/100, or if you get higher limits, maybe 100/300. Lower limits maybe 25/50. And what that is it's a per person and a per accident limit. So in a lot of insurance coverages in Kentucky, you may have a $25,000 per person, but no more than $50,000 per accident. And when you have a school bus accident, then you have the potential for multiple injured parties, and then they've got to divvy up that 50,000. All the liability is going to pay is that 50,000 of coverage from there, and then their limits are exhausted, and it may have to be divvied up among 5, 6, 10 children.
It doesn't leave much to go around.
Exactly, it doesn't leave much to go around, and then the attorney's job at that point becomes, okay, what are the other avenues that we can look at to compensate my client for their injuries and make sure the medical bills are taken care of and all the medical bills are paid, and my client's parents aren't out of pocket anything from pursuing from the injuries that the person has received. So looking at the potential insurance on the school bus that may be there to help compensate that, the potential insurance coverage on the parents' vehicles also could come into play in those settings. In looking at all those other avenues, potential avenues of recovery is part of what the attorney's job is.
When you say coverage on the parent's vehicle, are you talking about like underinsured or under?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that applies in this case.
It could, yes, yeah, because they are it depends on how the policy language reads, but most policies that I've read is a resident relative is also covered even if they're not in that vehicle at the time. So if I'm riding with if I'm riding with you, for instance, in your vehicle and we have a collision, even if you're not at fault, I wasn't in my vehicle. My underinsured motorist coverage could be available to me in that setting.
And we've kind of gone through underinsured motorist coverage in a couple of different podcasts. In fact, the last episode we covered that. But it's basically when the at-fault driver doesn't have enough coverage to handle all of your bills and expenses related to the accident, that underinsured coverage actually comes into play, where you can file for maybe that whatever that hole is, how much that didn't cover. You may have a claim on your own policy, but that's something you're already paying for.
Correct, exactly. And under Kentucky law, the way the regulations are, they're not supposed to and should not be raising your rates because you pursued that coverage, because it's not because you were at fault, that somebody else was at fault. So your insurance rate should not go up if you pursue an underinsured motorist claim.
Okay. Well, if does PIP coverage come into play in a school bus crash for the students, for the victims who are hurt?
Yes.
On the bus.
Yes.
You want to explain that real quick?
Yeah, PIP coverage, as we've talked about before, but PIP coverage, also called no-fault coverage or basic reparations benefits, is coverage that's available for coverage of medical bills, lost wages, and some other things, but that's what you normally see. School bus crash, most likely not going to be lost wages for the children anyway. But it's there for that. It will cover up to the limits per person, but each individual person has that coverage. It's not 10,000 and then 10 kids each split 10,000.
Right.
Each
So
child has
it's different
10,000.
from the insurance coverage.
Correct.
This PIP coverage starts at basically $10,000 per injured victim, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
And
it
then
goes from there.
you can purchase additional coverage from that standpoint, but that would apply in a bus crash as well. And it's the vehicle that you're in is the one that pays that coverage and then gets reimbursed at some later date, at least from the at-fault driver's insurance.
So I mean, I hate to say that's good news for the parents, but sometimes I mean that's one of the big worries is, oh my gosh, these medical bills, how are we going to cover them? And again, the system is out there, to work sometimes to their benefit, which is a good thing. And again, if they are working with an experienced attorney, I mean, you've done this for what, 30 years now?
Yes, 30 years, and that's true that you've got that coverage there. And then potentially, if depending on what coverage you have on your own policy, if the parents have added reparations benefits, which is basically additional PIP, if they have that, then that may kick in and pay above whatever it is on the vehicle the child was in at the time of the collision.
Yeah,
So,
that PIP is just personal injury protection. I mean, it's there, and it's a good policy to have. In the state of Kentucky, we basically have it almost automatically, so that's kind of nice. You don't have to prove negligence, like you said. It's no fault.
correct. No fault coverage. Correct.
That's a good thing. So as we close out the episode, if I'm a parent and my child was involved in an accident on the school bus, Jeff, can you give us some kind of words of advice? And again, we talked about, your child may have sustained a whiplash or some other soft tissue, which could be strained muscles and tendons and things like that. Broken bones, obviously, you're going to recognize. Brain injury, maybe not, but be on the lookout for that. Obviously, some PTSD. And in the worst case scenarios, possibly, a fatality would be involved. But let's talk to the parents really about how they should approach this. And probably isn't something to kind of sit back and say, oh, Johnny's just going to walk it off.
Correct. Yeah, it's not a situation where you tell your child to rub some dirt on it, it'll be fine.
Oh, you've met my parents.
I had the same. My parents were the same way.
Brother from another mother.
These are situations where you want to sit down and have a conversation with the child and talk with them about how they're feeling, and don't poke and prod the child, but watch them and see if they're not moving their arm like they did move the arm beforehand. They seem to be protecting something from that standpoint. Keeping, pay attention to if they seem to be doing things, they just don't seem to be themselves. I frankly, when you're dealing with children, on other podcasts, you've heard me say, I know there are some attorneys who will say, if you're in a wreck, always go to the doctor. If you're an adult and you're in a wreck, you're not having any issues from it, minor collision, you're not having any problems from it, it's okay to wait and not go to the emergency room or go to your family doctor. When you're dealing with smaller kids especially, I think it's a good idea to take them to their pediatrician. Maybe not go to the emergency room that day. Now, obviously, if they're complaining of things or cuts, bleeding, something of that nature, get them to the emergency room for treatment from that standpoint. If the pediatrician is closed, but if even if you don't go to the emergency room, call up a pediatrician, get the child in to see the pediatrician so that they can give the child a once over, make sure there is hopefully nothing going on, but if it is something going on, they're going to pick up on it, and then hopefully pick up on it anyway. And the sooner the child is treated for for any injuries, the greater likelihood, as a general rule anyway, from what I understand, the greater likelihood that they're going to recover without any lasting effects.
Well, I mean, that's the silver lining there, but you got to be proactive. And we spent some time talking about the traumatic brain injury. And again, sometimes there's not really something on the outside that you can visibly see. I mean, they may have a bump on their noggin or something like that, but you don't have to have an impact to the skull to actually have that brain injury.
Right.
So mood changes and things like that, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mood changes. They just don't seem, they get angry quicker than they used to get angry. If if they have a headache, they say something food doesn't taste right. And then, give them an orange or a lemon and say, does it smell right to you, or something of that nature, to see if their sense of smell has been affected.
Because the kiddo's not connecting this with the crash. I mean, they just know, hey, today.
Yeah, they may not realize that they're not smelling things the way the way things used to smell, and then they sit down and eat their favorite food, and it just doesn't taste good to them, and because our sense of smell is tied to our sense of taste in a lot of ways, and so paying attention to all of those things is, in children or parents are. They know their kids better than anybody else, and so just pay attention. If you think something is out of whack, then get the child looked at, and it's better safe than sorry in these situations. Absolutely.
And if you're worried about the medical bills, again, that PIP is there. You shouldn't really have any out of pocket, or at least it'll be reimbursed through the PIP. And that's a fairly easy claim to get rolling.
Exactly. And yeah, the PIP claim is not difficult at all to get rolling from that standpoint. And you've got that coverage to cover the medical bills. So there's no reason why you should not go get the child checked out. I understand people struggle financially at times, and don't want to incur medical bills unless they have to incur medical bills. PIP pays 100% of the medical bills. You're not out at co-pays. You're not out deductibles from that standpoint. And when you're dealing with your children, get them checked out just to make sure everything's okay.
Well, and then I'd like to wrap up with just the possibility of PTSD. And again, if you notice your child's exhibiting, again, almost like brain injury, but you just notice they're upset, they're agitated, they're scared of things. Some time with a therapist can really get them back on the right track, and that's a healthy thing to do. Sometimes people get really stigmatized, thinking, well, I can't let people know my child's going to a psychologist or something like that. That's a healthy thing. That's
Absolutely.
Taking ownership and actually approaching it, and you're helping your kiddo more than you realize.
Absolutely, and I agree with you 110% from that standpoint. And that can help them get over the trauma. From that standpoint, and unfortunately, in this country, still today in 2022, we still have a stigma for mental health treatment that we shouldn't. If you've got a mental health issue that needs treatment, get treated. Through my career, I have seen the benefit and the quality of life improvements that have occurred from people who've gone in to see good mental health counselors, good psychologists, and got treatment to deal with the issues that they were going through.
No, that's outstanding. Jeff, let me wrap up with this, and I like to kind of put this out there in a lot of these personal injury podcast episodes. You actually can handle school bus collisions all throughout the state of Kentucky, right? I mean, you don't just have to live in Callaway County or Christian County.
Correct. I handle cases all over the state of Kentucky. From that, my office is in Murray, Kentucky, and my satellite office in Hopkinsville, Kentucky. But I'm licensed by the state of Kentucky in all courts in Kentucky. And I'm also licensed in the federal courts, so I can handle a case anywhere in the state of Kentucky from that standpoint, and do handle cases all over the state.
And Jeff, if somebody's listening to this and says, hey, you know what, I do need to get in touch with somebody that understands this, what number should they use to pick up the phone and call you?
The local number for my office is 270-753-0053. I also have an 800 number, 1-800-844-5108, or they can reach out also by email at jeff@jeffrobertslaw.com.
Terrific. Jeff, I know you're busy. I really appreciate your time. I hope if there's a parent out there who unfortunately has a child that's been involved in a bus collision, school bus wreck, however you want to call it, these are serious situations, and your kiddo may be dealing with some stuff that you hadn't really considered or just were unaware of, but hopefully we've given you some insights and perspectives here. And I know you want to be a good parent, and we're just asking you to be proactive, especially where these little kiddos are involved in any kind of collision.
Absolutely.
Jeff, again, thanks for your time. We'll be back in about 2 weeks.
Thank you, Jim.
Take care. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to the Roberts Law Office Injury Podcast. Jeff will return in 2 weeks. Until then, he invites you to visit jeffrobertslaw.com and follow his firm on Facebook. At the Roberts Law Office, you'll find a history of small town service and big city results.